Now, the oil filter is located on the top of the engine underneath this access panel. However, the oil filter housing is a plastic part, and it is prone to failure either by warping or cracking. You're going to want to remove this entire cover, and it pops off pretty easily, but there will be one T30 Torx screw that you're going to need to remove. So once you loosen that, you'll just spin it off pretty quickly. Then you can just use your hands, and you're just going to pop up each corner. It's going to be 4 clips holding this cover on. Once you loosen all 4 clips, you can then remove this cover from the top of your car. With this cover out of the way, I found that the easiest thing to do is to take something like an iPhone camera and turn the flashlight on for this, and you're going to stick it over to the side of your oil filter. Now, if you notice, there was a reflection coming off from the bottom. That was actually a pooled oil on top of the engine. That is a classic sign that you've either lost your tight seal because this housing has either warped, or if someone screwed on the oil filter cap too tight, you might have actually cracked it. In either case, you're going to need to replace this. I recommend replacing it with an aluminum housing because this is a very common failure mode in these cars. I'll put a link in the description. Now, because we are disconnecting a lot of the electronics, we do want to disconnect the negative battery terminal. That will be underneath the front passenger seat. So if you just slide it all the way forward, you can get under and just jerk up on each corner of that piece of plastic. Then you can use a 10 millimeter and disconnect the negative battery terminal. Now, some of the newer cars have an auxiliary battery. You're going to want to disconnect the negative terminal on that one as well. Next, we're going to remove the air intake. So there's a 5/16 hose clamp here. So we'll loosen that. Now we'll remove an air temp sensor. So we're going to pull this little red tab up and then remove. We have another 5/16 hose clamp to loosen. Now, I recommend disconnecting the hose from the throttle body first. Once you do that, you can start lifting on the plastic air hose and disconnecting it from its push connectors in back. Just give it a tug, and now you can just kind of wiggle it free and remove that from the engine. All right, we're going to remove this wire harness from the throttle body. Push this tab out. We'll push that out like that. We'll do the same on the map sensor. We'll slide that little tab forward and pull that connector off. There'll be one more connector here. There we go. I want to get this wiring harness out of the way. So first thing I'm going to do is remove this peg. This is the bracket that holds on the engine cover. There's a 10 millimeter bracket bolt right here I need to remove. Next, we're going to remove this connection, and there's a little green tab. You're going to pop this up, and then we're going to push this off. Okay, with this connection removed, we can now get in at that bolt right there. It's going to be a 10 millimeter, and we're going to remove that nut. Once we get it part way off, I'll remove it the rest of the way by hand. Next, you're going to remove a tree connector here, as well as put your trim tool underneath this and pop it up. Then you can slide this wire harness over, and this bracket, you're going to spin it up and out, and then rotate it all the way up so that that gap allows you to slide it around that connector. Next, we are going to slide off this clamp. Now, below the EGR valve, we have another bracket, and there's a 10 millimeter nut here we need to remove. With that nut removed, we can pull this bracket off like so. We also want to remove this electrical connection to the vacuum. We just push in, disconnect that. There we go. Next, behind the manifold, there's one air line. You can see the green clip. That's just a quick connect. You're gonna pop off that line. Then there are two more brackets. You can see that 10 millimeter nut there and another one right there. So we're gonna remove those with a 10 millimeter wrench. There we go. And now that second one. Next, we have some hoses we need to remove from this side of the engine. So I'm going to use a hose pliers and just twist this hose and then lift it up. This is a great tool so you don't damage the hose. Next, I'm gonna remove this line, and what I'm gonna be doing is taking a screwdriver, pushing down on this clip, and then I can pull it off. Now I wanna release some of these lines from their connectors. This one we will just lift straight up. Use a trim tool, cut this one up, and now we can get these out of the way. Okay, now there's 8 millimeter bolts that we are going to remove. All right, with that manifold loosened, the only thing left is we have the hose clamp off to the EGR valve. Now we just want to loosen this hose. So I'm just using a picking tool and I'm going all the way around as best I can to try and get this hose loosened so we can slide it off. We'll remove the foam pad. Notice it's on the passenger side, and I put a small mark to tell me which is the front. Now I'm just gonna take a look, see how things look. Yeah, I can see lots of oil down by that oil filter housing. And fuel rails look okay. Kind of dusty, but things look like they're in pretty good shape. Now I don't want to risk dropping anything in these air intakes, so I'm going to put a paper towel in each. So now, using a picking tool, I'm going to raise all of these red clips. With the red tabs up, you couldn't see it while I was doing it, but you want to press right here. That will open up the connector and you're going to pull it off. And there's going to be 3 of them that you'll remove. I did remove the trees holding this wire harness. I'm going to repeat the process on the driver's side. Now we will loosen the 8 bolts holding on the lower air intake. Once you've got the lower manifold unscrewed, you can gently lift it up. And then I'm using a couple of bungee straps just to hold this thing up in the air. Now, before we go any further, put some paper towel in each one of those ports. With all of our ports filled with paper towel, we can now remove the oil filter housing and cooler. Now we have complete access to our oil filter housing and cooler, and we need to get behind it. There is a harness behind it, right there, you can see it. And I'm going to push that little gray clip up and then squeeze it and remove it. I don't have much space in here, so I'm gonna have to stop the camera while I do this. Next, we are going to remove the 5 screws that are holding on the oil filter housing. These are E8 Torx. There's one there, one on this side, and then 2 behind that cooler. All right, so this is our first shot, lifting up the oil filter housing, and you can see all of the oil and coolant, which is pooled in the V of the engine. So I'm going to remove all of that oil and clean everything up. Then before I disconnect the coolant line, which is the last thing still connected to the housing, I am going to drain about 2 quarts of coolant out of the engine in order to get the coolant level below the height of the oil filter housing. Now I am simply using an old turkey baster to siphon or suck some of the oil and coolant out of the V of this engine and then put it in a container. And I've heard some people using shop vacuums or electric pumps, but that seems pretty messy and I didn't want to mess up my shop vac. So I'm just doing this by hand, and it took me about 10 minutes to suck all that out of there and fill a plastic container. So using a turkey baster, I got about 16 ounces of both coolant and oil off the top of the engine. Now on the driver's side, on the bottom of the radiator in the front of the engine, here is a shot of the drain plug. So it's a red dial on my 2019. You just want to turn that and you can drain coolant out of your coolant system. So with the coolant drained, and we did a little bit of cleanup, I now need to take off that hose clamp that's behind the housing, and then I can remove the old one. There is a plastic harness holding on to that coolant line. I clipped mine, so I had a little bit more room to work. Now I was able to pull it a little further forward, and I can get my pliers on that hose clamp. Just a couple of quick observations. Here is the new oil filter housing. As I said before, solid aluminum, so if there was any warping issues, that should be resolved. Couple of things. So obviously the one I'm replacing is plastic. It was not a great idea by GM to do this. However, looking closely, I don't see any cracks. However, what I think happened is if you look close, all of the seals on all of these surfaces are completely crushed. And so even though I'm sure these original OEM bolts were torqued to spec, everything is so smooth that it probably no longer made a good seal. So, and in particular, because I had oil all the way at the top below the filter, my theory is actually this one right here. The O-ring is completely smooth. It doesn't stand tall at all around this port. I believe that when I took the oil off for the last time, this thing was on super tight, totally over torqued by the shop that did the last oil change before I did it. And when I loosened the filter, I think I just moved this housing enough where all the oil started leaking, probably mainly from this one, but it could have also leaked from the rest of these as well. So, looking at the new one, you can see all of these O-rings are really standing tall. They're probably going to swell a little bit when they take on a little bit of oil. We'll see. Solid housing. One thing I do notice is that this connector right here does not match this one. So I think what I'm going to have to do is take off this old connector and put it onto the new one. Not a huge deal. I will be more thrilled if everything works the way it should, and this thing does not leak going forward. Thanks for watching. Check out the description for more information and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos.